The number one question everyone has is, how does BattleCats perform on the Surface Duo? You are going to have to wait until later to get that answer. Instead, here's the TLDR. I expected greatness from the Surface Duo. In reality, it falls short in the most basic ways. I was very excited for this device. I used to carry around multiple phones every day for multiple years. I thought the Duo could be the new hybrid device that bridges the gap and allows me to have two devices combined into one. I wanted this to be the mobile version of having two TVs in one room. I still believe that this form factor has potential. However, the software is just way too unfinished to make this product something I can justify, especially for the price. Let's start with things that I love about the physical design of this phone. I like the idea of having two screens versus one. I do believe that one day that this can be solved with software, but right now just having two screens, whether it's two monitors or two TVs, it's just worked better for me in terms of versus picture-to-picture or software things, or even just a mentally a way that I use my device. So I like the idea of having two screens versus one big one, and then using software to split it up, at least for now. I like the aspect ratio, that it is not going in line with what a lot of other devices are doing. Most other devices are doing where they're just getting longer and taller. Personally, I'm a fan of the 16:9 aspect ratio, which is what most TVs are. I still wish more phones would go back to doing that. Phones did do that for a while. And while this is not doing that, I'm appreciative that it is not doing the long ratio, because I think that has not been a super comfortable aspect ratio for my daily use on the phone. And having that with two screens would make it even worse. I do like the thickness of this phone, especially when the phone is closed in on both screens. It's a little bit thicker than my iPhone 11 Pro is, and that has not been a bad thing in terms of it feeling too big. I can't help but think of a lot of comparisons with this phone and the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2 5G, something like that is the name. It's a very long name, but anyway, it's coming out soon, and obviously it's another folding phone. That one is one large screen, but another thing that made me really inclined to like the Surface Duo more was the fact that when it's folded in, there's no weird uneven gap like there is on the Z Fold 2. Something that I also like when comparing it with that device is that I don't like the idea of like a third or outer screen. I have these main screens to the phone, and I want to use those. I don't want something that's a worse experience to make me use the phone just out of convenience. And I don't know, maybe my thoughts would be different if I used the Z Fold 2, but right now, at least in theory, I like just having the two main screens and that I use those, and that I'm always using the most optimal screen as opposed to a lesser screen. Something that I've been wanting for years and felt like no one was delivering on was no camera bump. Now, there's other things we can talk about when it comes to the camera, but from a physical design perspective, I like that there is no camera bump, and that's because there's no outside camera. There's one camera on the inside of the device that is front facing when you're looking at the screens, or depending on how you fold it, but that one is not a bump either. And again, you're probably sacrificing quality when it comes to that. You could argue, though, a lot of it is software. In any case, just again, going back to the physical design, I like this is a flat phone with no camera bump that I can put on a flat surface. Another part of the physical design that I really liked a lot with this phone, was excited for, and it definitely delivers on, is its kickstand ability. Microsoft calls it postures in terms of all the different ways you can hold it or use it or prop it up, but years ago I used to buy kickstands that are attached to the cases of every phone that I had, but I eventually gave up on them because they were so bulky. I still miss that functionality, but just kind of have phone stands around the house and the office for when I use them. But having a device that in theory didn't need any physical kickstand because of the dual screen and the hinge, I could prop it up pretty much any way I wanted to. And that is something that works really well, and something that just, I know a lot of other people have talked about how well built the hinge is, but I will just reinforce that and say that it's done very well, and just having that functionality is great. And overall, I just really like the minimal design of this device. It has one Microsoft logo on the front. It has no words. It has no writing. It has no IMEI numbers on the back. It's clean. It's minimal. I really appreciate the overall symmetry of the device. Now let's get into the problems that I experienced within the first 24 hours of using this device. As much as I just talked about how much I like the physical design of the phone, there's definitely some opportunities for improvement or some crappy things. The corners are just a little sharp or uncomfortable. I mean, it's the kind of thing where if I said, hey, this phone feels sharp, check it out, and then you held it, you probably wouldn't think that it was very sharp, but just using it for any kind of extended period of use, it's just not comfortable to hold. And I don't know if that can be solved with rounded corners or what exactly contributes to that, but it just wasn't something that was enjoyable to use from that perspective. Also, when holding the phone, the speaker location is really not an optimal location, especially for landscape orientation when you're using both screens, because it's right on the edge, and so it's easy for you to put your hand over it and block the sound coming out of it. Now you can flip that around so that you're not holding that part of it, but then if you look at the back of it, your hand is covering the logo, which is, in practical use is not a big deal, but it just makes me really wonder if they'd considered that and if maybe they were just limited by this design and that was the only place that they could kind of put the speaker on, but it felt really limiting and just kind of a bummer to use for that perspective. The screens are different colors of white. Now, most of the time this probably won't matter, but I noticed it when I did a single app in full screen mode where it was taking up the whole screen real estate using both screens. And as I scrolled, I could see that it was clearly different shades of white. Again, functionally, it's not a big deal, but as you'll see, this device is kind of death by a thousand cuts, where there's a lot of little details and little things that individually aren't a big deal, but they really add up to a poor experience, and it's unfortunate that this is one of them. In a similar fashion, I have a criticism that it might feel like nitpicking, but this device, when opened up, is very thin. It is so thin that the USB cable used to plug into the device is thicker than, half the device or one of the screens. Now, the reason that is a problem for me is that if I was trying to use the device while it was charging and have that plugged in and kind of have it in a kickstand position or like a mini laptop, and when I did that, the USB cable was not flush with it. I thought, okay, well, let me try out a few different USB cables, but every cable I tried, including the one that it came with, that cable is thicker than the screen is, and so it does not sit flush with the table when it's plugged in. And if you remember, that was one of the things that I liked about not having a camera bump on this device, is that it was flat, and it was something that I could put on a flat surface and it would be even and flush with the surface. Ironically, with this surface, if it's plugged in and you're using that side of it, it is not flush, and it's just another weird detail that I'm not sure if they cared about or thought about or were just limited by the design. I know that this might sound funny because this device really doesn't seem like it's made to be used with one hand, but using one hand with it just wasn't comfortable for me. Even when I had both screens open, if you're using multiple apps, it kind of forces you to use the keyboard on one screen or the other. And when that happens, I really didn't enjoy doing that, even though they kind of shrink the keyboard down to make it so that it's more comfortable to use. Being forced into using one hand when I wanted to use two was kind of weird. Now, the software issues with this device were very surprising to me. So surprising that something as simple as using the home button or the home gesture to swipe was really inconsistent. It doesn't always work. It sometimes moves the app to the opposite screen instead of just going home. Sometimes it disappears to where I can't use it at all. And then sometimes it kind of displays incorrectly where there was a gap in between the bar at the bottom. And it would still kind of behave the same way, but it's just kind of weird seeing that pop up there. If you have one app open and then the other screen is just your home screen, sometimes I couldn't always scroll to the left, which was a weird issue. YouTube would randomly be blurry or pixelated, And I'm not sure what caused that. It was inconsistent. It didn't happen all the time, but it did happen multiple times, and I wasn't sure what was causing it. Also, just kind of YouTube in general, if you did it in, where it's taking up the full screen, both screens, the play pause button was blocked essentially by the hinges in the middle. It still functioned, but it was just kind of weird to have that not show up or be there. So if I didn't know it was there, I wouldn't be able to do it. Sometimes the picture-in-picture stuff would be weird, and just the orientation was inconsistent in terms of it sometimes taking up the full screen and then sometimes kind of doing a portrait presentation on the landscape orientation of the screen, if that makes sense. It was very weird. Another kind of funny detail that really doesn't matter for practical purposes, but just makes me question how much detail that they paid attention to. This is definitely something that they could have, fixed, and I don't think that they were limited by the hardware or the design, is that when in landscape mode, the volume and power buttons are at the bottom. If you press up to increase the volume or right on the landscape orientation, it'll actually move to the left, displaying it on the screen. So it's just very weird. We've gotten used to mobile devices where if you press a button in a certain direction, the display is going to represent that and be in sync and go the same direction. And this goes the opposite way. Again, from a practical purpose, doesn't really matter, but it just makes me worried that they didn't pay attention to these details or care about them enough to get them fixed. I was really hoping that they would optimize being able to truly use both screens independently of each other at the same time, but even something as simple as being able to do the home gesture swipe on both screens at the same time does not work. In a similar fashion, you can't have the keyboard open on both screens at the same time. It's one or the other and kind of switches back and forth. And again, these are some of these things are small things, but just that extra second or extra tap of having to bring up the keyboard again, as opposed to just having it available on both screens while doing multiple things at the same time, didn't work, and it was a bummer for me. I really should have known right at the beginning when I was going through the setup of this device. I had both screens open. It was connecting to Wi-Fi, kind of doing the normal Android setup. When I was going through it, I realized I didn't need to have both screens open, so I closed it into the single screen mode. And when I did that, the next button disappeared, so I was not able to progress with the setup of this device. And it just really made me think, wow, this is just the setup. I'm not even actually using the device yet, and it's already not functioning properly if I go to single screen mode. It makes me really concerned what the rest of the experience is going to be like on this device. I do want to talk about the things that I liked. I really like the app groups to where you could pre-configure it to where you have two apps open at the same time as opposed to having to manually do that. That was great. Worked well for fantasy football if you're in multiple leagues using multiple apps, or if I was doing research on one screen and looking at my lineup on the other screen. On a normal phone, I'd have to go back and forth, and just having that open was really nice. And even though I had all those problems with YouTube, I really enjoyed being able to watch a YouTube video on the top screen while I played a game on the bottom screen. Again, in a normal phone, I would just have YouTube playing in the background while I played the game. And sometimes I would do picture-in-picture, but the picture-in-picture stuff, again, it would kind of get in the way of my game, even if I had to move it around a little bit. It took away from the experience. So that's one thing I was really excited for with having a dual screen phone, was that I could really have two full apps open at the same time and not really compromise that. And that was something that worked well. I do not have a Microsoft Surface Pen and did not buy one for this device, but I like the idea that it supports that. So if that's something you're interested in, that's great that that's available. Then the thing that is the most important thing with any phone, any device, but especially this one that everyone wants to know: how's the Battle Cats performance? It's great. Battle Cats, I've played on, iPhone aspect ratios, iPad aspect ratios, the super tall like OnePlus aspect ratios, and I was concerned, how is Battle Cats going to render in this wider aspect ratio as opposed to taller? And it does a great job. Also, the performance was great. So the processor with perspective of Battle Cats was not an issue. But speaking of the specs, it's probably talked to death at this point, but it's worth mentioning, especially for the price tag. There's There's no 120 Hz refresh rate for the screen. It's not a super high amount of RAM. It is an older processor. The speakers are pretty weak on it. It does have large bezels, but those didn't bother me as much. But if I do have bezels in the device, I would prefer that it's using it for the speakers. It's not waterproof. It doesn't have wireless charging. Even the charging port location for a phone that's pretty symmetrical, the fact that it was off-center was odd to me, and I didn't. Maybe there's a purpose for it, but I did not see what it was, and just took away from the experience for me. In conclusion, I really thought Microsoft was going to come out swinging with this device. I was hoping for an epic return to smartphones for them. I really liked Windows Phone back in the day, but thought the major thing that was holding it back was the lack of apps. Now that this Surface Duo is their first Android device, the apps are no longer a problem. Not only that, but this is a dual-screen phone. They claim that they are really focused on making the software integration with the hardware amazing. They said they partnered with Google to optimize this. I've really appreciated Microsoft's approach with mobile apps on iOS and Android, and even the extra integration they're doing with Samsung devices and Windows. Seems like they really took their time on this device. And I thought it was because they are focusing on making the software great. They are asking a high price for a device that lacks modern specs. I believe that that would be acceptable if the software experience was top-notch. I really kind of thought that they were taking an approach similar to Apple, where they were going to focus on the user experience and not worry so much about how many gigabytes of RAM it has. However, I can't say that they did that. Even using something as simple as the home button is not a good experience, let alone a lot of other basic actions on this phone. This lack of detail for basic functions leaves me confused how this ever got signed off on getting released. I hope Microsoft has future OS updates that fix these issues, but just in general, I can't really trust companies saying that they will make something better in the future with updates. If they truly cared, then these issues would have been fixed before the device was released. Also, here is Ruggles the dog using OneNote. Thank you. I'm John with Life Never Lost.